Hey guys, tonight we follow the scent of wet gunpowder and old wool as you wade through a battlefield so foggy, you can barely tell which way is France. Cannons roar in the distance like angry thunderclaps, and smoke curls around your boots like indecisive ghosts. Somewhere ahead, silhouetted against the pale morning light, you see it, the unmistakable shape of a two-cornered hat worn sideways. Not just any hat, of course, that hat, the one that somehow became famous in its own right. The one Napoleon Bonaparte wore as if the fate of Europe rested on its perfectly steamed crease. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing how far this sleepy little army of listeners reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You clutch your musket tighter, your hands aching in the cold, and watch as the man in the strange, sideways hat rides his horse as if he owns the continent, which, technically he kinda does at this point. The air smells of sulfur and sweat, and somewhere nearby, someone's shouting about forming lines and holding fire. But all you can look at is the hat. It's not the typical way to wear it, mind you. Most officers, when they donned the bicorn, angled the 2 points from front to back, like a narrow canoe perched on their heads, ready to sail off into bureaucracy. But Napoleon? No, he wore it sideways, with the points extending left and right like a stretched-out crescent moon. It made him instantly recognizable from afar, iconic even, like a walking national emblem but with better posture. And that, of course, was the point. In an era where identification often depended on elaborate uniforms and shouted declarations, Napoleon's hat was a practical move disguised as a fashion statement. If you were scanning the chaos of a battlefield, looking for one man who could decide your fate with a flick of his gloved hand, the sideways bicorn was your best bet. Historians still argue whether the sideways angle was truly an innovation, or just an eccentricity that happened to catch on. Some claim he wore it that way purely to stand out. Others suggest it helped him keep track of wind direction for gunpowder. And a very passionate minority insist he was just stubborn about his personal style. You dodge a puff of grape shot and duck behind a broken cannon wheel, all while contemplating how ridiculous it is that this two-cornered woolen thing, essentially a glorified hat taco, became one of the most enduring images in Western history. It's been on coins, cartoons, postage stamps, and paperweights. It has its own museum exhibits. It's outlived monarchies. And weirdly enough, people started copying it. But not yet. Right now, on this chilly morning, you're just trying not to freeze. And as your breath curls in the air, you watch Napoleon adjust his reins and raise one hand. Even from this distance, you can see the way the hat catches the light. Matte black, lined with a tricolor cockade. It's as much armor as it is accessory. He owns multiple hats just like it. Probably more than you own socks. But each one is made to the same specifications. Stiffened felt, curved brim, slightly upturned edges, lightweight enough to wear in the saddle, but broad enough to shield from sun and rain. It's like the Swiss Army knife of generals' hats. The original bicorn design wasn't even French. It evolved from the earlier tricorn, that three-pointed hat you probably associate with powdered wigs and people yelling, "Huzzah!" in taverns. Over time, as battlefield needs changed and hairstyles stopped resembling bird nests, the tricorn flattened out and lost a corner. Thus, the bicorn was born. Simpler, sleeker, still just as prone to falling off in a strong breeze. But Napoleon's innovation, or quirk, depending on who you ask, was to reorient the hat. It wasn't meant to impress court ladies or rival dukes. It was utilitarian, a practical, theatrical way to say, this is who I am. This is what I command. And in the theater of war, that mattered. You blink slowly, letting your eyes rest on the rhythmic rise and fall of the emperor's horse. There's something hypnotic about it, like watching a pendulum swing or soup simmer. You can almost forget the chaos around you. It's worth noting that this hat wouldn't look particularly dramatic up close. It's not bejeweled, no golden embroidery, not even a fancy feather plume, just black felt and geometry. But from 100 paces it screamed authority, and according to some period accounts, it made people stand up straighter just from the sight of it. Later, when Napoleon was exiled, first to Elba, and then to the less vacation-y island of St. Helena, he kept wearing variations of the same hat. Because when you've branded yourself with headgear, it's hard to switch to beanies and berets. You can almost imagine him staring wistfully at the ocean, hat slightly tilted, muttering about lost glory and dry scones. The weird thing is, it worked. The hat endured. Artists painted it. Writers described it. Political cartoons mocked it. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being just a hat and started being a symbol of ambition, of charisma, of megalomania in high-quality wool. You lean back against a splintered tree, exhaling slowly, and try not to think about how something as small and simple as a hat can become immortal. It's almost comforting, really. In a world where empires crumble and generals fade into trivia, the right accessory can give you a weird kind of forever. The wind rustles the grass. You close your eyes. Somewhere behind you, a bugle calls retreat, but the hat keeps riding.
You wake up stiff, probably because you fell asleep against a cannon wheel again, and your boots are soaked through with the kind of dew that makes your toes want to file. Complaints with management. But as the fog thins and the day slouches forward, one thing remains unwavering on the horizon, Napoleon's two-cornered silhouette. That hat still perched like a smug little roof of destiny. So let's talk about the hat itself. Not just its fame, but its shape. The bicorn, as it's properly called, is essentially two flaps of felt angled toward each other, rising like wings from either side of the head. It looks like it should take off in a breeze, but surprisingly, it usually stayed put. There's a science to this. Well, 18th century science, which was mostly just trial, error, and more starch than seems medically advisable. You'd think the hat was just a dashing ornament, but no, it was more like a silent semaphore. Napoleon wore his sideways, en bataille, as they said, so the flat edge faced forward and back, and the points stuck out like tiny horns of authority. His officers usually wore theirs front to back, known as en colonne, which might have made sense for parades, but not if you were trying to lead troops from across a chaotic battlefield. This wasn't just vanity, it was practical visual engineering. In a sea of muddy uniforms and chaotic movements, seeing that hat instantly told you where the boss was, like a moving command tower, but with epaulets and a good tailor. And in a way, Napoleon's entire look was built around this principle. Be the easiest man to spot, even in a soup of identical mustaches and gunpowder. The materials weren't exactly luxurious either. These hats were usually made from black felt, sometimes beaver, if you were fancy, or wool if you were just very determined. The inside was lined with silk or sometimes linen, and there'd be a band of grosgrain ribbon around the base just to keep things polite. The thing had to be stiff enough to hold its shape, but light enough not to turn your neck into mashed potatoes during a cavalry charge. Balance, people. And then there's the cockade. That's the little rosette or ribbon attached to one side of the hat, usually in the colors of the national flag. For Napoleon, that meant the red, white, and blue of revolutionary France. It wasn't just decoration, it was allegiance. A tiny flag waving from your forehead. Historians still argue whether Napoleon was meticulous about its placement or if his hatters just got really good at guessing. There's even a popular anecdote, probably exaggerated, about how Napoleon once refused to attend a meeting until his favorite hat was returned from the cleaner. And by cleaner, we mean probably some exhausted valet who had to iron it over a steaming kettle, while the emperor muttered about battle formations. Being emperor wasn't just about military genius, it involved a shocking amount of hat logistics. Now, let's talk visibility. Imagine you're a general squinting across a field while cannonballs are politely trying to decapitate you. You need to know where Napoleon is, not because you're worried for him, he's usually guarded by half the army, but because you're waiting for orders. One look at that sideways hat, maybe catching a glint from its cockade, and boom, you adjust your line. That's what makes it genius. It wasn't just a hat. It was a GPS with flair, and yet it wasn't meant to be flashy. Unlike the crowns and feathered monstrosities of kings past, Napoleon's hat was understated. Serious. Kind of like when your boss wears the exact same outfit every day to appear decisive and efficient, but secretly just doesn't want to do laundry. Same energy. One of the stranger things about this hat is how it managed to be all things at once. Utilitarian, symbolic, and kind of weirdly cool. There's even evidence that some of Napoleon's enemies respected the hat even if they didn't much care for the guy underneath it. Like, yes, he's invading our homeland, but you've got to admit, he wears that felt pancake like a pro, and not everyone could pull it off. There's a reason the bicorn never went mainstream like jeans or dad sneakers. You needed a certain gravitas, or maybe just the gall to walk around with one and not look like you were auditioning for a low-budget opera. Napoleon had it. He made it look like destiny. Of course, it wasn't all battlefield swagger. Sometimes wearing the hat was a form of pageantry. Napoleon knew optics. He staged public appearances with all the drama of a Broadway show, and the hat was center stage. Whether he was inspecting troops, awarding medals, or simply standing on a windy bluff, looking contemplative, that sideways silhouette became part of his persona, like Steve Jobs with a black turtleneck, or Batman with literally everything. You hear a rumor in the ranks. Some say he sleeps with the hat beside his bed, like a weirdly cozy symbol of power. Others swear he only wears hats made in a secret Parisian shop that no one can find. One especially poetic soldier claims the hats are stitched from shadows and ambition. Not true, obviously, but you've got to admit it sounds right. Later, when artists painted Napoleon, they almost always included the hat. Not because it was required, but because leaving it out felt like omitting his nose or forgetting France existed. Some of these paintings made the hat larger than life, sometimes literally. In one portrait, it seems big enough to seat a dinner party underneath. The proportions are, shall we say, aspirational. So you sit back in the saddle, or maybe just slump into a pile of hay, and think about this odd little thing, a piece of felt with corners, which somehow became one of the most recognizable shapes in European history. It didn't save lives. It didn't win battles, but it made people look. And when you're building an empire, sometimes that's the first step.